This is apropos. The Swedish government is the latest EU member state to announce a multi-million euro investment in air and drone defence capabilities. It comes as Donald Trump scales up his threats to withdraw the US from the NATO military alliance in anger over Europe's refusal to join the American-Israeli war on Iran. With more on how the continent is trying to reduce its reliance on the United States and to take more responsibility for its own security, here's Monty Francis.
It's fair to say the world's largest military alliance is in the middle of a family crisis. Given repeated threats from Donald Trump that he was strongly considering leaving NATO, a group the U.S. helped forge in the wake of World War II, it's becoming more and more clear to European allies that they may have to go it alone.
I do think that were the Trump administration to withdraw from NATO, it would change the world. It would in some ways push the world toward a geopolitical jungle in which Europe would be on its own.
The numbers reflect those fears. A report from a Swedish think tank, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, found that the U.S. accounted for 58% of arms imports for a 5-year period ending in 2025. That's down from 64% during the 5 previous years. Europe increased its overall military spending since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and while there's been an increase of weapons sourced from within the EU, overall arms imports have increased threefold. After the U.S., South Korea was the next largest supplier to Europe, followed by Israel and France, each accounting for 7 or 8% of imports, all up significantly from the previous 5 years. While Europe is boosting its own production, European nations continue to import U.S.-made weapons, especially when it comes to aircraft and air defense systems. By the end of 2025, the U.S. had outstanding orders for almost 500 fighter jets just in Europe. The second largest producer is France, with about 180 orders for aircraft worldwide.
Well, to discuss the consequences for Europe, we're joined by Guntram Wolff, Professor and Senior Fellow at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme. Guntram, you are a specialist on European rearmament, among other things. Given the increasingly bombastic rhetoric coming from the White House, particularly in the last few days, is it time and is it even possible for Europe to start going it alone in terms of its security and defence?
Yeah, I think it's time, and it is actually not just possible, it's a necessity to increase the domestic share in defense-related good procurement, because any weapon we buy as Europeans from the United States, while it is on the short term an asset, it is actually a liability, both in terms of the technology dependence that it creates towards the US, but also in terms of the missing growth story and the missing domestic ecosystem of firms that would develop. I mean, let me just give you one example. I mean, we've been importing lots of air defense weapons from the United States, Patriot missiles and the like. But our domestic European producers like SAMP-T have barely produced anything new since 2022, since the start of the war. So it is time, given the fractious relations across the Atlantic, it's time for us Europeans to step up. And yes, I would say it is possible, because a lot of the technology is actually available, and it's more a question of political will. One has to accelerate the purchases, and as one does that, the firms will really ramp up production capacity relatively quickly.
And why hasn't this really been happening since the war in Ukraine? You've said yourself that there are lessons to be learned from what Kyiv has been doing since 2022. So what kind of areas does Europe really need to prioritise now?
Yeah, I put out a piece at Bruegel where I made it very clear that the lessons from Ukraine, but also the lessons drawn from the war in Iran, is that we need substantial amounts of air defense, and not just the expensive stuff, but also the inexpensive stuff. So the stuff that allows to intercept drones at relatively low cost. And we've been really lagging behind, even though the top technology firms in that space are in many cases actually European, they're Ukrainians. And it's now the Gulf states that go to Kiev and talk with Volodymyr Zelensky and try to secure the supply from Ukraine. So this kind of relatively cheap air defense is absolutely necessary. But in the Bruegel piece, I made a second very important point, which is that you cannot just defend by intercepting the multiple missiles, ballistic cruise missiles, as well as drones coming at you. You have to have the capacity to strike relatively deep in the foreign territory, in the enemy territory, and basically hit military production sites. And that means you have to have missiles, long-range missiles. You have to have long-range drones, and you have to actually have the technological capability to do this. And again, I think Ukraine shows the way. It has really increased that kind of intervention. It has done so successfully. It has interrupted Russian production quite substantially on a number of occasions. And I think Europe just needs to be prepared, and it needs to draw on its domestic industrial base to do so.
And Guntram, worryingly, you've also said that any wider conflict potentially between Europe and Russia would play out as a more intense version of what we're currently seeing in the Middle East. Do you think this is a likely scenario, that Russia is actually planning some kind of invasion? And are European leaders taking that threat seriously enough?
Well, I mean, nobody can make exact predictions of what the Russian president will decide to do. The reality on the ground is that Russia is already doing multiple operations across the continent, hybrid operations. We are seeing drones flying over military sites, over airports, over shipyards, production sites for new ships. So Russia is already at some level actually doing what I would call a hybrid warfare, and it's actually affecting not just one or two countries, but actually most European countries have been affected by these kind of operations. So I think it would be naive not to prepare, because only if you are prepared, only then you will be respected. And I think really it's the preparedness that prevents the worst, and that basically deters Russia from attempting to do so. And here comes the point. I mean, given that we cannot trust the US under the leadership of President Trump, I mean, we really have to step up the preparation ourselves. We simply cannot afford to hope that the US will bail us out one way or another. It's a European responsibility to take care of our security.
And speaking of Russia, it would obviously come as a very good news to Vladimir Putin if Donald Trump were to pull out of NATO. But when he's already talking about it, as he did this week, as a paper tiger, is he in effect actually reducing the power and the influence of NATO itself? And does it simply amount to a paper tiger, if that's how the US president sees it?
Well, I mean, NATO is more than a paper tiger. I mean, it's in daily operations. I mean, when a Russian fighter jet enters the airspace in Estonia, it is a NATO protocol that lets Italian jets scramble to intercept that fighter jet from Russia. So NATO on a day-to-day basis is, of course, working and is operational. But the truth is, when things become more difficult, I mean, when the political level gets more involved, then everything basically depends on the decision of the individual leaders. And there's no legal sort of requirement for a US president to intervene forcefully based on NATO protocols when there was to be a significant attack. So in that sense, the power of deterrence of NATO, the credibility of NATO really has been diminished massively by these statements of the US president.
And a lot of his anger currently directed at NATO allies and European allies over the fact that they're not coming on board, as it were, to help with his offensive on Iran. Do you think that Europe should be at this stage perhaps doing a little bit more to try to get the Strait of Hormuz reopened? We saw the UK convening about 40 countries today, calling again for it to be open. But what is actually and what needs to be done here to get that waterway up and running again?
Well, I mean, let's be clear. It is not the responsibility of NATO allies to clean up the mess that the US president has created without consulting any EU ally, European ally in the first place. So this is a war started by the US, started by Israel. It is a badly thought through war, and it has massive consequences for the entire global economy, for US consumers, for European consumers, for Asian consumers. And yes, there will have to be some solution. I don't think that a military solution on the Strait of Hormuz is easy to do. I mean, it's extremely risky. Given the asymmetric war powers that Iran has and has demonstrated. I mean, let's not forget Iran has been able to hit 13 military bases in the Gulf by the United States, and so is really affecting U.S. troops and shifting the power of U.S. aircraft carriers away, and so on and so forth. So Iran is very, very powerful, and so this notion that you can just simply open that Strait of Hormuz is not going to work like this. I think the way Europe should contribute to this is by engaging in an open discussion with Iran. I think we can, as Europeans, offer to Iran some sort of a deal in which Iran would get more trade access. We would negotiate with Iran on development goals. Conversely, Iran would commit not to develop the nuclear bomb and basically to open the Strait of Hormuz, or at least allow ships to pass with a toll. I think in the end it will be ships passing the Strait of Hormuz, but having to pay a fine, a fee to actually pass it.
Guntram, we'll have to leave it there for now. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme this evening. That's Guntram Wolff,
Thank you.
Senior Fellow at the Kiel Institute for the World Economy. Thank you.